Hello friends, I'm Paul Estabrooks, and today I would like to tell you the story of God's Bicycle Man. The story occurs in the late 1970s when I joined Open Doors working into China. And on my earliest trips to China, whenever I went to the city of Shanghai, especially if I had shoulder bags or other bags full of Chinese Bibles, I would meet with a man whose name was Julian Pei. And Julian would come right to my hotel. He was fearless, this man. And he would bring often his wife, and in this picture, 2 of his 3 daughters. And we would have dinner together in the dining room at the Peace Hotel on the Bund, the waterfront of the city of Shanghai, every time I visited there, which was fairly frequently. Interesting thing about that hotel was they had a closet with a lot of old antiquities in there. And one of the things they liked to show tourists like me, which I was considered always, was one of the signs that used to be actually posted on the front of the Peace Hotel at the waterfront of Shanghai during the British colonial era. And the sign they still have in the closet there says, "No dogs or Chinese allowed in." And they were quite proud of that sign because now, of course, the hotel is totally operated by and for Chinese people, as well as the occasional tourists who come through and want to stay down at the waterfront in Shanghai. We would meet at dinner there. And Brother Julian would tell me all about the house churches of Shanghai. He was familiar with most of the groups there, the leaders. He became well known with Wang Mingdao after he was released from prison and when he was about 80. And he lived in Shanghai with his wife. Julian knew all of these people. The key leaders of different, what we would call denominations, different groups of believers in China. And he knew, of course, their Bible needs. And he would ride his bicycle everywhere. Now remember, this is the late 1970s into the early 1980s. And in those days, there were very few cars on the road in China. There were thousands and thousands of bicycles. I mean, you would see a red light at a corner of a main intersection, and the entire lane, which would be possibly even 4, 5, even 6 car lengths wide, would be totally jammed with bicycles waiting for the light to turn green so they could go ahead. He was a bicycle extraordinaire. He would go 20 to 30 kilometers outside the city, and Shanghai is a big city, outside the city to deliver scriptures to Christians who didn't have any. And he was totally committed to the Word of God and sharing the Word of God with believers who needed it. So we would sit and chat over meals at the hotel very, very frequently. And I would often say to him, "Aren't you a little concerned about being identified with a foreigner like I am and being kind of open about your meeting with us?" And he'd say, "Oh, no, I'm immune. I am not a Chinese ethnic person. I am South Korean. And so just like you, I'm a foreigner here. I happen to be married to a Chinese wife, but I think that my status as a foreigner gives me special grace in this country." That turned out to be a little bit of a naive view. But in 1982, the last time I saw Brother Julian, he was parked with his bicycle at the side of the road where we had planned to meet. And I had a number of shoulder bags, just chock full of Bibles. And every so many hours, he would say, "Meet me back here in 2 hours' time, for example. And I'd be out with another shoulder bag. I actually happened to have a tour group with me from Singapore in 1982, and every one of those people had a big, heavy shoulder bag just jam-packed with Chinese Bibles. And Brother Julian would be there with his bicycle. And then, the last time I saw him, pedaling off on that bicycle down the road with one of those heavy bags on the back of his back fender. And he had a little carrier top on the fender. And he would be off somewhere to deliver scriptures to Christians who needed it. He was God's bicycle man. Well, in 1983, he was arrested. China charged him with being a spy for Taiwan. That's just typical of what was going on in those days. So he's a Korean national living in China and being very, very helpful for the house church movement in the city and outside the city. What he really was guilty of was aiding the growth of the house churches in that large city of Shanghai, and of meeting with foreigners, much like myself, which he was, I believe, was the real reason that he was arrested. And he was given a 15-year jail sentence for that activity, the official activity being a spy for Taiwan, which he definitely was not. During his imprisonment, which happened to be at a prison inside, number 2 prison of Shanghai City, his wife and daughters were able to bring him food and things that he needed, medicine and whatever. He was a man in his mid-70s when I met him, and so he would be considerably older when he was finally released in 1995. And he was released because his situation was made very public by a number of ministries. This picture is a picture of the whole family, which was published by Keston College. Keston was a research center in the UK, headed by Michael Bordeaux, an Anglican priest, who was knowledgeable about the Soviet Union especially, and Eastern Europe, but interested in Christian prisoners all around the world. And they published this picture asking people to pray for him because he was put in prison under very, very flimsy charges. And his family was asking constantly for Christians around the world to pray for him. And in the middle 90s, there was a report to the Congress, it's online, the U.S. Congress, that China had reported that he was released unconditionally and returned to his family. Today he's with the Lord, and I believe the Lord was saying to him when he arrived, "Julian, well done, good and faithful servant. You were my bicycle man."